On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history when they became the first humans to land on the moon. Broadcast lived to millions of people around the world. It was a groundbreaking achievement for science, technology, and human exploration. However, not everyone was convinced that the moon landing was real. Over the years, a fringe group of conspiracy theorists has argued that the entire Apollo 11 mission was staged by the US government. They claim that the images, videos, and evidence presented to the public were fabricated in a Hollywood-style studio. But why would anyone question such a monumental event? In this article, we will explore the most compelling arguments and pieces of evidence put forward by moon landing conspiracy theorists. While some of these claims have been thoroughly debunked by scientists and experts, the debate about the moon landing's authenticity remains a source of fascination for many. Prepare to delve into the evidence that has fueled one of the most enduring and controversial conspiracy theories in modern history. 1. The origins of the moon landing conspiracy theory. The idea that the moon landing was a hoax didn't emerge immediately after Apollo 11's success. For years, the moon landings were largely celebrated as a triumph of human ingenuity. However, in the 1970s, questions started to rise. In 1974, Bill Kaysing, a former US Rocketdyne employee, published a self-published book titled We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle, which was one of the earliest and most influential works to suggest that the moon landing was a hoax. Kaysing's argument centered on the idea that the United States government, in the midst of the Cold War and the space race with the Soviet Union, would have staged the landings to secure a symbolic victory. The theory gained momentum with documentaries, books, and interviews from various skeptics over the years, eventually leading to a wider belief that the moon landing was a hoax, or at least partially falsified. According to these theorists, the United States would have had much to gain from faking the landings, especially considering the geopolitical pressure and the race with the Soviets. 2. The flag controversy. One of the most talked about pieces of evidence cited by moon landing conspiracy theorists is the American flag planted by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon's surface. Conspiracy theorists argue that the flag appears to be rippling in the vacuum of space, where there is no air to create wind or movement. According to these theorists, this suggests that the flag was filmed in an environment with air, like a soundstage on Earth. However, this claim has been thoroughly debunked. The flag was designed with a horizontal bar along the top to keep it extended. In the vacuum of space, when the astronauts twisted and planted the flag into the moon's surface, the movement caused the fabric to ripple, creating the illusion of wind. The lack of air resistance doesn't mean that objects can't move at all. They simply don't stop moving immediately. Additionally, the flag was made from a special material that was stiff enough to hold its shape when manipulated by the astronauts. 3. Shadows and lighting. Another common argument put forward by those who believe the moon landing was faked involves the shadows cast in the photographs taken by the astronauts. Skeptics claim that the way the shadows fall in the photos suggests that multiple light sources were used, implying that the photos were staged under artificial lighting in a studio, rather than taken on the moon where there is only one light source, the sun. 4. The lack of stars in the photographs. One of the most commonly cited pieces of evidence for the moon landing hoax is the absence of stars in the photographs taken on the lunar surface. Conspiracy theorists claim that if the moon landing were real, the photos should have captured the stars in the background, as there is no atmosphere on the moon to obscure the view of space. However, this argument is based on a misunderstanding of photography. The Apollo astronauts used cameras with fast shutter speeds to capture clear images of themselves and the moon's surface, which required them to adjust the exposure settings. Because the exposure settings were optimized for the bright sunlight on the moon's surface, the much dimmer stars were too faint to show up in the photographs. On Earth, the same thing happens when taking pictures. In bright sunlight the stars aren't visible. 5. The moon's radiation belts. Can humans survive? A common argument against the moon landing involves the Van Allen radiation belts, which surround Earth. Skeptics argue that astronauts traveling through these belts would have been exposed to lethal levels of radiation, making it impossible for them to survive the journey to the moon. However, this claim has been disproven by scientists. The Van Allen radiation belts do indeed contain harmful radiation, but the Apollo spacecraft passed through the thinner regions of the belts quickly, and the spacecraft were shielded from the radiation. The amount of exposure was minimal and not dangerous to the astronauts. Additionally, the spacecraft's trajectory was carefully planned to minimize the time spent in the belts, and the astronauts were well protected by the spacecraft's materials. Radiation experts have consistently stated that the Apollo missions were not only feasible but safe for the astronauts. 6. The lunar module's landing on the moon. Critics also point to the seemingly impossible nature of the lunar module's landing on the moon. The lunar module, which was designed to land on the moon's surface, has been criticized for its seeming lack of thrust control or stability when landing. Skeptics question how such a fragile spacecraft could have landed on a rocky surface without toppling over. In reality, the lunar module used a highly sophisticated descent engine to gently slow its speed as it approached the moon's surface. The spacecraft was equipped with multiple systems for stabilizing its descent, including radar to measure altitude and speed, and a computer that could adjust the engines in real time to ensure a safe landing. The idea that the lunar module could have toppled is a misunderstanding of how the technology worked. In fact, the precise and controlled nature of the landing has been studied extensively and is regarded as one of the greatest engineering feats of the Apollo missions. 7. Retroreflectors and scientific evidence. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence supporting the reality of the moon landings is the retroreflectors left on the lunar surface by the Apollo missions. These devices, which are still there today, are used to reflect laser beams sent from Earth back to their source. Since 1969, scientists have been able to bounce lasers off these retroreflectors to measure the distance between Earth and the moon with incredible accuracy. If the moon landings were faked, it would have been virtually impossible for the US government to plant retroreflectors on the moon without detection. This scientific evidence continues to provide strong proof that humans did, in fact, land on the moon. No amount of photographic manipulation or video tricks could explain the presence of these retroreflectors. 8. The Soviet Union's silent sea during the Cold War. The Soviet Union was the United States' biggest rival in the space race. If the US had faked the moon landings, it is highly unlikely that the Soviets would have remained silent about the hoax. In fact, they were closely monitoring the Apollo missions and even tracked the spacecraft. The Soviet Union publicly congratulated the US on the achievement, and no evidence was ever presented to suggest that the moon landings were anything but genuine. If the Soviets had discovered a hoax, they would have used it as propaganda to undermine American credibility on the global stage. 9. The Apollo moon rocks. Another significant piece of evidence is the collection of moon rocks brought back to Earth by the Apollo astronauts. These rocks have been studied by scientists around the world and have been shown to have unique properties that differentiate them from any rocks found on Earth. The composition of the moon rocks is consistent with what we would expect from the lunar surface, and the geological characteristics support the idea that they came from the moon itself. If the moon landings were faked, it would have been extremely difficult for the US to create such realistic and scientifically valuable rocks. The analysis of the moon rocks has been one of the key pieces of evidence that proves the authenticity of the Apollo missions. While the idea that the moon landing was faked remains a topic of fascination for some, the overwhelming evidence supports the reality of the Apollo missions. From the detailed accounts of the astronauts to the scientific data provided by the retroreflectors and the moon rocks, the evidence against the hoax theory is clear. Conspiracy theories about the moon landing have been thoroughly debunked by experts in various fields, and there is no credible scientific or historical basis for the claim that the moon landing was staged. Ultimately, the moon landing remains one of humanity's greatest achievements, a testament to the ingenuity, determination, and courage of those who made it possible. While it's essential to question the world around us and seek the truth, the evidence overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that we did, indeed, land on the moon.